It was a very cruel summer if you're talking about how fucking hot it was all the time. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am wrapping up the 5 books that I put on my summer TBR this year. Every season I like to put a couple of books on there that have the kind of vibe of the next couple of months that I'm going through, are exciting books that I really want to get to, and most of the time I get most of them finished. There have been a couple of times that I've gotten all of them done. Last couple of seasons haven't been so successful. So let's see, in summer, did I actually get all of the books ticked off? Spoiler alert, no. We're gonna start with the token, not even begun book from the TBR, and this time it was The Beach Holiday by Isabel Broom. Now, I have nothing against Isabel Broom's writing. I've said a couple of times on here that I actually really love it because of how it transports you to completely different places across the world. You get to experience different cultures, different countries, a completely different way of living, even without having to leave your own sofa. That is something that I really wanted to do this summer. I don't have any big holidays planned this year, so I really wanted something that was going to take me out of my little German apartment and bring me right across the world. This book is set in New York, which is a place that I've already been to, but it's set in the Hamptons in New York, which is an area of the place that I had not actually been to. And I don't know what it was about this, but I just never found myself reaching for it. It feels like the perfect summery read. The cover itself is absolutely screaming colour and summer and sunshine, but I just never went for it. The book even features one of my favourite things about books, which is books about books and about authors and about writing. So I don't know what it was that I just never reached for it. I think across June, my reading was just so chaotic, as thanks to the Amazing Readathon, that this just never fit into any of the prompts that I wanted to read it for. Or in July, I was still suffering from the Amazing Readathon induced slump that didn't have me reaching for as many books as I wanted to. So maybe it just wasn't the right time for this book. Even though it's really summery, and even though in August, technically I could still read it because it is a Berlin summer and the temperatures are still rising and rising, I feel like it's a failure just on the side of the summer TBR. Then let's go into the rest of the books, because with varying degrees of success, I actually did read the rest of them. Let's start with Summer by Ali Smith. I initially started reading the seasonal quartet with Shannon from 155 books, Amelia from Amelia Barlow books, and the two of them gave up on this series, I think around winter or spring. But I persevered. I wanted to keep going, and the completionist in me wanted to see it out to the end. I kind of wish that I had not done that. I had a vlog put together where I read all 4 of the books in the series, and I think that that is the reason that I wanted to keep going. I wanted to kind of document my time with these books, and even watching back over that vlog now, this book is still a book that exists and I read it. There's a lot of this book that has completely escaped from my mind. I can barely remember the characters' names. I think their names were Sasha and Robbie, or Robert, or Bobby. And they were siblings, they were living in the UK, and this is set around the initial stages of the pandemic. So you are seeing a whole lot of questions about COVID and what the lockdowns are going to mean, and everybody's different reactions to it. And this is very realistic of what people's reactions were actually like in real time. There were a lot of people who were very skeptical about it. There were a lot of people who were very much on board with the social distancing and with all of the lockdowns that we had to go through back in the early stages of 2020. But the book doesn't just take place there. There is also a setting way back in the 1930s, 1940s, back in Nazi-controlled Germany, where you are following Daniel, who you actually met in the Autumn book. In Autumn, you meet Daniel as a man in his 80s, but in Summer, you actually meet him as somebody who is in his teens. And I felt like this was the kind of thing I wanted from the entire series. I wanted a lot more tie-ins. I wanted characters that I had met in winter to turn up in summer. And I wanted a mention of somebody that I had seen back in autumn, but actually turning up again in spring. That just wasn't something that appeared. It wasn't something that had happened. And I feel like it made the whole series pretty disjointed and out of sync with one another. It's also a little bit strange to me that they don't go in spring, summer, autumn, winter. They actually go autumn, winter, spring, summer. I felt like because summer is a much happier season, it's very bright, there's a lot of yellows, there's a lot of colour, I got the impression that this book would be full of happiness and full of lightheartedness, and boy was I wrong. You are of course dealing with the tough topics of COVID and the beginning of the pandemic, and of course with the Nazi-controlled Germany and the Holocaust, So there's not a whole lot of happiness and sunshine in this book, which is what you would expect to see from a book that has summer in the title. Do I regret reading this series? I don't think so. I'm glad that I got them done, but I don't think that I would have picked them up by myself if Shannon or Amelia hadn't messaged me and said, hey, we're thinking of doing this, do you want to join in? Am I going to read anything else by Ali Smith? It's a very strong no. I also read Love Me Do by Lindsay Kelk, and like The Beach Holiday, this was set in a super sunny area of the US, namely this time LA. I was super excited about this book. I have loved Lindsay Kelk since I first met her when she wrote I Heart New York back in 2009, I think. She's the foundation of one of my best and closest friendships in life, and I was a little bit disappointed by this one, actually. This book is following Phoebe, who is a greetings card writer, but is in the US for a couple of weeks to spend time with her sister Suzanne. Suzanne moved over to LA about 5 or so years ago and is working in a huge tech conglomerate in LA. As soon as Phoebe's plane wheels touch the ground, she has a message from her sister that Suzanne actually has to go up to Washington for a couple of weeks to take care of an app installation that they're going to be developing. This means that Phoebe is basically left on her own in the house when she was expecting to be spending lots of time with her sister and catching up and filling each other on things that they've missed. While Phoebe's in LA, she starts to build a couple of friendships, namely with Ren, who is Suzanne's next door neighbour, and with Belle, who is Suzanne's personal trainer. It turns out that Belle and Ren have met each other in passing a couple of times, and for Belle, it was instant heart eyes the second that she lay eyes on him. What's quite weird about this book is that Belle completely has a 180 in personality anytime she's around Wen. She is tongue-tied. She has no idea where she is, what she's doing, or how to do it. And I know that you do get a little bit kind of flustered when you're around somebody that you have a massive crush on, and when you're around somebody who you find attractive. But I felt like this was stretching that a little bit too hard, almost to the point of breaking. It just didn't feel realistic for me. It felt like a complete personality transplant. And that was really hard for me to marry. This person, Belle, who is like no thoughts, just vibes, and this other person, Belle, who is a lot more sturdy and a lot more sociable in real life. Overall, though, I found Belle a little bit of a difficult character to get on board with. She is the epitome of that sunshine LA person that you've seen on TV and that you've seen on movies, and I just could not get on board with that. The Irish are a little bit more cynical. We're a little bit more held back. We are a lot more like masking our feelings with jokes, whereas Belle is very direct. She's very to the point. She's very sunshine and everything is a good thing. It was really kind of a jarring personality for me to read, and it didn't enamor me to her for most of this book. While Phoebe decides to matchmake for Belle and Ren, she actually kind of develops her own feelings for Ren over the course of this book. And I felt like that was done really realistically, it was done really naturally. There wasn't a whole lot of insta-love about it. There was the kind of initial spark of attraction that you would get when you see somebody who is attractive for the first time. But overall, I didn't get that whole running home to write his name in my diary with a bunch of love hearts around it. It was realistic, it was done really well, but I just felt like there was something missing. There was one big thing about this book that I didn't really enjoy, and that is the entire storyline of Myrna. Myrna is a reclusive Hollywood actress who hasn't been seen in about 20 years. She's living in a really well-built up castle in LA. She has been an absolute starlet. She's been married a couple of times, but it turns out that Myrna is actually in love with a woman and has been her entire life, but felt like she could never express this, she could never talk about it because of how looked down upon LGBT relationships were back in the 1960s, 1970s. Does that sound in any way familiar to you? Sounds a little bit familiar to me too, and the entire time that I was reading that section, I could not get Evelyn and Celia out of my head. It felt way too close to comfort for me, and I understand that you might want to do a nod to it, you might want to kind of incorporate the ideas of it into your own book, but this book felt like Lindsay Kelk had just gone, this is a part of Evelyn Hugo that I really like, I'm going to put it in the book, word for word. I just didn't enjoy that part of it. It felt way too similar to Evelyn Hugo, which is one of my favorite books of all time. It was way too similar for me to kind of separate the two. Then I read Every Summer After by Carly Fortune, and I had a much better time with this book than a similar book by Christina Lauren. I had read Love and Other Words back in, I think it was February or March, And I just didn't love it. I didn't love the execution, but I really loved the idea. So when I heard that Every Summer After was a very similar storyline, I instantly went out and picked it up. This book follows Persephone, or Percy, and Charlie and Sam, who are two brothers. Percy's family has rented a cottage in Barry Bay in Canada, and Sam and Charlie's family have been living in Barry Bay full time for years. Their mother has a taverna in the area that serves a lot of Polish food in a nod to her Polish culture. And over the time that Percy and Sam and Charlie get to know each other, everything starts to get a little bit deeper. Percy really starts to become a member of the family, and it is so nice to see her being welcomed in and everybody really making her feel like one of the family. Percy and Sam's friendship started out as a friendship, but over time, feelings started to slowly develop between the two of them. And you see such a beautiful relationship developing between the two of them, and it develops quite naturally between the two of them. I really enjoyed that part. There was a little bit of jealousy when each was dating another person, and all of that happening when you're a teenager and hormones are such a driving factor of your personality. But overall, when Sam and Percy were actually together, I truly loved watching them develop together. About 6 years before the beginning of this book, Sam and Percy had a massive blowout falling out argument and have not been in contact since. But because Percy is such a big part of the family, when Sam and Charlie's mother, Joanna, passes away from cancer, Percy is immediately called to come back to Barry Bay for the funeral and to be with the family and to grieve. I really watched them as adults with a whole different set of responsibilities and with life experience coming back together, getting to know each other once again, and also the interspersing of times in their childhood versus times as an adult. Over time, you do figure out why it was that Percy and Sam have no longer been in contact and what happened in the breakdown in their relationship. I did not enjoy that. Anyone who has been here for ages will know that a cheating narrative is one of my least favorite tropes to read, and this is a big part of this book that I just didn't gel with. Especially because of who cheated and with whom they did it. It was a huge kick in the teeth to the other person, and I really could not get on board with it. If I think back about the book and if I think back about everything that I had read, there were signs that that's what was going to happen. There were signs that that's what was coming, but it didn't really make it any easier for me to digest when we actually did get there. It also shows the kind of fickleness of girl-teenage friendships. I don't know about you, but my best friend and I were constantly at loggerheads with one another. Yes, we had a really close friendship, and yes, we're still very close friends to this day. But back then, we fought like cats and dogs over the smallest of things. Anything could have set us off. The relationship between Percy and Delilah is really portrayed in a great way when it comes to that. You can see that there is a lot of respect between the two of them, and they do hold a lot of great feelings towards one another. Platonic, of course, but it all comes absolutely to blows one day, and I was not truly surprised at how it happened. I think it kind of took me a little bit by surprise as to how it had happened, but the whole mechanics of what was the one that initially brought that big blowout together, it was definitely something that I thought would be the reason. I genuinely had a great time with this book. I have got my sights on the other two, Meet Me at the Lake and This Summer Will Be Different. I know that they are not connected. I know that this is not a series and they're all 3 standalone novels, but I just wanted to begin at the beginning and then make my way through the series as it goes, so that I would get a kind of an idea as to what Carly Fortune's writing was like and figure out if it was the kind of writing for me. Finally, I read Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, and this was my pick of the entire bunch. I was super excited going into this because I have loved Fern Brady's comedy since I discovered her maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But that love was absolutely cemented when she went on Taskmaster season 14, I'm pretty sure. You can really see Fern express herself as her true self during Taskmaster, and she has said a couple of times that she feels like that is the most autistic friendly game show that you can go on. Strong Female Character follows Fern when she comes to terms with her adult diagnosis of autism, and having a look back at her childhood, realizes that there's a lot of things that had happened where, if she had been diagnosed with autism as a child, everything would have made a lot more sense. As an holistic person, there was not a whole lot of I know how this feels because, or I can associate with this because in this book, but it was truly eye-opening for me to see what the world is like for somebody who is autistic and who is neurodivergent, and a whole different way of living life than I would be accustomed to. For me, there are things that are so straightforward and that I barely have to put a second thought into, whereas for Fern, it takes a little bit longer for her to come to terms with. It takes a little bit longer for her to adjust to slight different changes in her daily routine, for example, or for something that has been discontinued and that she has loved for truly a long time and has become part of her personality almost, and is now no longer available, not as readily available to her. It truly sends her into a spin. It was such an eye-opener for me to see kind of how the other half live. And I don't want to say that it's made me more aware of the struggles that autistic people live with, because obviously I will know that there are some things that they have to deal with in a different manner or that they will have to work around. But it did truly make me step back and think about things a bit more. Something that I did find a lot of connection with Fern though is her parents. They had a very strong feeling of Irish Catholic parents to me. Now they're Scottish, but they're still Catholic, and there were a lot of comparisons that I could make between Fern's parents and my own. I think when you have that strong Catholic upbringing, it does shape you as a person, no matter if you stay religious as an adult or if you drift away from the church. There are things that are going to impact who you are as an adult that I absolutely saw in Fern and saw in myself. This book was very much kind of a read for me in that sense, in that it felt like it was holding a mirror up to me and saying, this is who not only Fern is as a person, this is also who you are. Before her big break into comedy, Fern had been working in a lot of kind of there and now jobs, including a stint working as a stripper in some of Glasgow's biggest sex clubs. I really enjoyed this representation of sex workers. I felt like it was very realistic, obviously because it was about Fern's lived experience, but it didn't really give this whole idea that you would have come to from TV or from movies where you have seen what working as a stripper is like. This felt a lot more real, it felt a lot more gritty, and I really enjoyed listening to that. I really enjoyed learning about what life is actually like in comparison to what you would just see on the screens. There was one thing that I didn't enjoy about this book, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Fern and how she told it. It is just how the ebook dealt with footnotes. There were a couple of times that when I got into the list of footnotes at the end of a chapter, I would learn that I had actually not clicked into a couple of them because they were hidden away so small and packed in so densely with the words in the sentence that sometimes it was kind of hard to actually make them out. I don't know if that is something that can be fixed in future printing, but it did just make it a little bit harder for me to read them. Those are the 5 books that were on my summer TBR this year, and that is how I fared with most of them. Have you read any of the books on this list, or have I convinced you to read any of the books on this list? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me an ice cream emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.